The 6 nobles didn't utter a word. They acted as if Krang and Enkrid didn't exist.
Wait quietly. Don't speak unless asked. Keep your head down, avoid eye contact, and answer with sincerity when questioned. If the queen summons you, step forward and kneel on one knee before responding.
During this, Viscount of Bentra approached and spoke. Enkrid nodded without showing any sign of disgust. Only someone who wasn't a beast or hadn't trained their sensory arts would find it hard to catch that kind of stench. It seemed like Viscount of Bentra was in charge of handling the dirty work, as the others kept their distance. Enkrid, suddenly concerned, asked,
"Are you being ostracized?"
were the other nobles deliberately giving him all the difficult tasks? If so, should Enkrid dangle some incentive like Jackson might? The Viscount of Bentra didn't even blink at his question. He had remarkable composure, not a single crack in his demeanor. Did Count Molson have a good eye for people? Between the wide sleeves, trained muscles on his arms were visible. He was clearly someone who had handled a sword. His calloused hands told the same story. They were much like Enkrid's own, hands that had gripped a sword despite being torn and battered. "One," Viscount of Bentra warned, continuing in a tone that suggested caution. Enkrid just shrugged in response. Perhaps this conversation was refreshing for some, as 2 of the nobles turned their attention. However, no one spoke to him. As they waited a little longer, a few nobles began to whisper. They covered their mouths, leaning close to each other. They probably thought Enkrid couldn't hear them, but thanks to his honed senses, he could. When he focused, their conversation became clear.
"He's way below our level. I heard his skills are on par with a junior knight. Did they bring him here as a recommendation for the knighthood? Maybe we should thank him for watching our backs this far. Look at the state of the guy they brought in as one of their own. At least he's got a face suited for rolling under some noblewoman's skirt."
If Rem had overheard, would he have split their heads open with his axe? He had always had a quiet disdain for such noble scum, but Enkrid didn't care. It wasn't the first time he'd heard such talk. Whatever anyone said could easily be ignored. As Enkrid half listened to the noble's conversation, he glanced over at Krang, who stood stoically. His posture was steady, though his expression made as if he were lounging with crossed arms, leaning on one leg. The queen soon appeared.
Her Majesty the Queen arrives.
Of course, she wasn't alone. Accompanied by her royal guards, they entered and took their places at the door of the audience chamber, and the door through which the queen entered. Were the golden tips on the spearheads her personal preference? That thought randomly crossed his mind. Surely not. It must have been a display of authority. The royal guard doubled as a ceremonial unit, so naturally they were armed with such gilded weaponry. The golden helmets and spears would certainly make for an impressive sight during inspections. Curiosity briefly flickered in his mind, but he quickly brushed it aside. What did it matter?
Is it you?
The queen spoke directly to Enkrid as soon as she arrived. She seemed more like a warm, jovial woman than someone who ruled a nation. Enkrid was reminded of an older tavern maid who had looked after him in his youth. One was a ruler of a nation, the other had served beer. Their statuses were worlds apart, and they didn't even resemble each other, but Enkrid found a subtle similarity in their demeanor. "Bullhead," Viscount Bentra scolded from the side, as if rebuking him. Should he have obeyed?
Leave him be.
The queen interjected. She looked at Enkrid's face for a moment before speaking.
A pleasant appearance.
It wasn't in a way that suggested she desired him, but rather a simple, genuine compliment of his looks. Enkrid had no response to that. He couldn't exactly say, "The queen is quite generous, now could he?" In truth, the queen wasn't exactly thin or frail. She had a moderate build and wore a tiara that symbolized the crown on her head. And next to her there was a familiar face, or rather a familiar frog, Guruk. The frog puffed up its cheeks for a moment. Was that its way of smiling? Enkrid greeted it with a nod of his eyes. This was Lua Gurn, who had been with him when he acquired the nameless correct sword technique, who helped him train in the correct sword technique, and who got riled up every time they encountered cultists.
"Do you not know any manners?"
One of the nobles remarked again. That alone was enough to show how little respect they had for the queen's authority. Even though the queen had given her permission, the fact that a mere noble was stepping in showed the disarray. Enkrid noticed but chose to let it slide.
We've gathered to confirm whether you truly bear the royal blood. State your name.
The queen, seemingly oblivious to the noble's comment, turned her gaze to Krang. Enkrid didn't even have the chance to step forward and kneel. The queen smoothly changed the subject, and that was the real point. Naturally, the noble couldn't continue questioning Enkrid either. The focus shifted away from Enkrid. Krang stepped forward. The noble who had glared at Enkrid now directed his ire toward Krang. He was a spineless man. If he had chosen to show hostility, he shouldn't have shifted his gaze so easily. Enkrid observed Krang as he stepped forward. There was something about his stride. It wasn't too fast or too slow, but steady and dignified. As Krang walked and lifted his gaze to meet the queen's, there was a sense that despite being physically below the throne, he was meeting her on equal ground. He exuded such an aura of authority and confidence. Even though his clothes were dusty from travel, and his hair was disheveled from the lack of a proper wash, none of that mattered. He possessed dignity and presence.
Kadianath Rangdius Narl, here I am.
Krang spoke, his voice resounding through the chamber. The sound echoed off the walls of the audience hall, creating a reverberation that seemed to shake the entire room.
Come here.
At the queen's command, an old woman, draped in a long, flowing robe, stepped forward from behind her. She took a pendant from Krang and compared it to something in her hand.
It matches.
There was also some incantation to verify Krang's bloodline during the process. Enkrid simply watched.
It is true. You are of my bloodline. I recognize you in the name of the Queen. If there are any objections, the ministers may speak now.
The group of nobles didn't say anything further, but their eyes spoke.
Yes, as if we didn't already know he's of the Queen's blood. It's the old king's bad habits that led to this.
They knew everything already. When they had gone so far as to send a set of assassins, what difference would it make to question Krang's legitimacy now? They even brought out a pendant engraved with the royal crest, and a wizard had confirmed it. It felt like watching a pre-arranged play. After that, the queen excused herself, saying she was busy with official duties. The ministers quickly dispersed as well. Somehow, Krang and Enkrid were the last to leave the audience chamber. The nobles ignored them, looking at Krang and Enkrid as if they were invisible. Not a single glance was given as they left. Even the one who had questioned their manners didn't say another word. As they exited the audience chamber, Enkrid finally spoke. It wasn't really his business, but the atmosphere seemed odd.
They don't seem to care at all.
A new succession had been acknowledged, and authority had been shown, yet none of the nobles seemed even slightly interested in Krang.
There are no nobles here who acknowledge me, only those who wish to see me dead.
Understanding Krang's hidden meaning, Enkrid asked,
So they think there's no point in talking to someone who's going to die soon.
Practical people, aren't they?
Krang chuckled. Was it really appropriate to laugh about something that could cost him his life? The dignity he had shown earlier was gone, replaced with a mischievous grin. Enkrid, concerned, said,
Don't get too close to Rem. As I keep saying, you're the craziest one in my eyes. I mean it. Try not to talk to Rem too much.
You've been influenced. Definitely influenced. As they stepped outside the audience chamber, they heard a voice.
Enki,
It was the frog Luagarne calling out to Enkrid.
how have you been?
With those words, the frog brought its hand down vertically, in a chopping motion. Enkrid raised his hand to block, already aware of the frog's movement. A trick. What mattered more than the downward strike was the footwork. The frog's foot pressed against the ground, sliding smoothly across the well-laid carpet as it closed the distance. It was a ploy to close the gap. Enkrid's trapping sword instinctively activated. His hand moved to intercept as the frog's slick hand twisted and darted, stabbing and striking in quick succession. Enkrid blocked every move. Because of the frog's slippery skin, deflecting the attacks was easier. In the first place, this was just a playful exchange lacking any intent to harm or serious aggression. The two soldiers guarding the front of the audience chamber watched them closely, their eyes gleaming. The level of their playful sparring was clearly high.
If we fought now, I'd lose. You've improved a lot.
Luagarn expressed his admiration. Puffing her cheeks with a guruk sound, she spoke with sincerity. It was exactly as she said. Indeed, with such improvement, even if the cultists had attacked, he could have crushed their skulls. Remembering that made her feel even better, and 2 more gurk sounds escaped from her cheeks.
Is this behavior appropriate in front of the prince?
Enkrid asked.
No one asks the frog to mind their manners.
Came the reply.
I agree.
Krang added, then turned to Enkrid and asked.
You know each other?
She's the frog who came to the border guard once.
Enkrid replied quickly, but Luagarni, cheeks still puffed, spoke up.
Are we so casual that you'd speak of our relationship so lightly? And what should I say? Didn't I teach you the sword and fight alongside you? We also went on a relic expedition together, nearly getting trapped inside.
It would take a while to tell the whole story.
Krang commented with a well-timed interjection.
Yes, it would.
Enkrid agreed before asking.
By the way, where has everyone gone?
Enkrid looked around, nodding as he asked the question. Not a single one of their companions was in sight. Had a knight jumped out and captured them all? Even if that were the case, they wouldn't have gone quietly. And they weren't the kind to simply rest when told to do so, even if ordered to relax in the palace. Despite Enkrid's thoughts, the 2 royal guards watching the group, including Luagarne, looked increasingly perplexed. Why was this Enkrid fellow speaking so casually to the prince, yet being more formal with the frog, and why was no one questioning it?
I always knew you'd make it here, Captain.
A sudden voice rang out, making Enkrid turn in its direction.
Hmm?
He was genuinely surprised. He hadn't expected to run into someone else he knew here, aside from Marcus or Luagarne. And if someone else did show up, he hadn't anticipated it would be anyone he had good ties with.
You. Addressing a noble with you. How improper.
The other person said with a playful smile.
And here I am, a prince.
Krang interjected.
Yes, Your Highness. Have you been well? Thanks to you.
The exchange was brief, taking place in just a few words.
Shall we move? I've invited everyone to my estate.
The familiar face suggested.
Andrew.
Enkrid said, recognizing him.
Andrew Guard.
He confirmed.
And I'm the prince.
Krang quipped.
Your Highness, have you always enjoyed making jokes like this?
Andrew blinked as he spoke. To Enkrid it seemed like Krang and Andrew knew each other, and he was right. Andrew had dreamed of restoring his family's fortunes, and rather than aligning with the established factions, he had chosen to bet his family's fate on someone else. That someone was Krang. Since parting ways with Enkrid, Andrew had gone through his own adventures, or perhaps misadventures. Now, Andrew Gardner had become a baron and proudly owned a house in the capital.
I'm surprised.
Enkrid said in his usual tone.
You don't look the least bit surprised.
Andrew replied.
I really am.
Enkrid insisted.
So, will you stay at Baron Gardner's estate?
Luagarn chimed in, asking before Enkrid could respond. Andrew answered first.
Please do. It'll be better than staying at an inn.
There was no reason to refuse.
See you later then. I've got a lot of work to do.
Luagarn said, waving her round fingers in a loose imitation of a human farewell. Enkrid waved back in return.
We'll talk more as we go. What about you, Krang?
Andrew asked.
I have to stay in the palace. There's a party in a few days to celebrate my return, and there's much to prepare.
A party. It wasn't exactly Enkrid's idea of fun. Before Enkrid could reply, Krang turned and walked away. Enkrid watched Andrew closely, realizing just how much his friend had matured. The stubble on his face had thickened, and there was a scar under his right eye that hadn't been there before. He was on his own now, without needing a nanny. As they had to disarm upon entering the palace, Andrew was also unarmed.
What about Mac?
Enkrid asked.
He's at the estate.
Perhaps Mac had stopped being a nanny and taken on the role of a butler.
All right, let's go.
Andrew summarized his recent life in a straightforward manner.
I risked my life on a mission, and now that I'm here, reclaimed my no joke. I'm still in the middle of this adventure.
There was no need to dig into the details of that adventure. It seemed he had managed to gather enough funds over time, as while his estate didn't have a garden, it was still a proper house in the capital. It was a 3-story building. The first floor had a reception room and a dining area, and the second floor was filled with rooms. More than 10 in total. It was a large and spacious house. When they arrived, they saw Rem and the rest of their group.
Well, Andrew, you've really made it big.
Rem said, munching on some sweets in the middle of the reception room. The capital was the hub of logistics, and naturally, its food culture had flourished, especially the dessert culture. Rem nodded as he chewed.
Rem's still the same.
Andrew commented from behind. Esther was dozing off on a wool cushion, while the rest of the group was loosely gathered in the reception room. Ragna stood by the window, and outside, a few men were seen training with wooden clubs.
Are those soldiers?
Enkrid asked.
But I will keep moving forward. It's forbidden to own private soldiers within the capital.
Andrew replied.
Then who are they?
They're students learning swordsmanship from me.
From who?
From me.
Andrew said.
Who?
Rem asked, still munching on his snack.
What are you teaching them?
Ragna added, turning his head to inquire. Jackson said nothing but silently observed Andrew.
If you see how much my skills have improved, you'll be shocked.
Andrew said confidently. Enkrid nodded. It made sense. Of course he would have improved. From what Enkrid could tell, Andrew had a natural talent.
Yeah, I'm sure you've gotten better.
Enkrid's voice lacked a certain energy. Andrew noticed and gave a faint smile. His lips curled up, but his eyes didn't show the same joy. While Enkrid had accomplished great things, Andrew had also overcome his own formidable challenges.
Want a sparring match?
Andrew suggested first. Enkrid nodded again. Despite all the things Andrew had done, welcoming him, inviting him, and introducing him to the Queen, nothing sounded more welcoming than this offer.
You sure you're okay with getting beat up and crying in front of your students?
Enkrid teased, concerned for his old comrade.
Screw it, bring it on.
Andrew retorted, gritting his teeth. Enkrid blocked Andrew's first attack, a straightforward vertical slash. The blades clashed. Enkrid's eyes met Andrew's gaze beyond the blade, tightly clenched lips and wide, determined eyes.
Has he improved?
He couldn't tell just yet. After all, Enkrid's memory of how well Andrew fought in the past was faint. Instead of attacking again, Enkrid pushed away the blade and stepped back. Andrew immediately thrust his sword forward. Enkrid gently deflected the thrusting sword and shifted his footwork. He stepped forward with his left foot. Andrew didn't notice. His slashing sword was blocked by the ember in Enkrid's left hand, causing it to glide off. Enkrid had been recently training to deflect swords solely by timing and instinct. It was a movement that resembled the swordsmanship of the fairy race. Naturally, it was a fluid sword technique based on Sinar's finesse. It hadn't fully become second nature, but given the skill gap, deflecting the sword wasn't difficult. Andrew's sword clashed with the ember, and with a resounding thud, the force misaligned and slid away. Andrew inhaled sharply and forced the flowing sword to a halt. In the meantime, Enkrid pressed his left foot down, as if gripping the ground with his toes. Using his left foot as a pivot, he sent his body forward. There was no need for even the slightest willpower. He closed the distance, stepping forward with his right foot and shifting his weight. Simultaneously, with a motion from his ankle to his waist, he thrust his palm forward. It was a strike combining the thrusting technique of Valaf-style martial arts with the concentrated burst technique from Auden style. He didn't use full force. That would have ruptured Andrew's intestines and killed him. He didn't add extra force using his grip, nor did he tense and release all his muscles. He only applied the technique with a sense of cutting precision. And so, Enkrid's palm met Andrew's abdomen. The sound was like a leather drum being struck. Andrew's body flew backward, his feet lifted off the ground.
Was that too strong?
Maybe it was a bit strong. Andrew, having been knocked back, gagged and spit out bile. It took him a while to catch his breath, but he didn't let go of his sword.
He has improved.
Enkrid was quietly observing when it happened.
Andrew, sir.
Mac rushed over in shock. Once Andrew's nanny, Mac was now his butler. When positions change and situations differ, one must adapt. Mac had become a loyal servant to Andrew. As Mac, pale-faced, hurried to his side, Andrew waved his hand. It seemed to be a gesture that he was fine, though he continued to cough.
Are you trying to kill him?
Rem asked.
I'm not, am I?
Enkrid replied.
He's coughing up his guts like that.
Looks like he choked. And that's your excuse?
The last comment was added by Ragna, who had been watching. Why did these two seem so in sync at times like this? After taking a few more breaths, Andrew waved Mac away.
I'm fine.
His voice was slightly strained, but the impact wasn't severe. It was like being hit by a cotton mallet. Of course, that cotton mallet referred to the one Auden used to wrap in cloth and strike Enkrid with.
But I will keep moving forward. It feels like a shame to end it here, don't you think?
Andrew caught his breath with a deep sigh and waited for Enkrid's response. From the look in his eyes, Enkrid sensed that Andrew had something hidden up his sleeve, and that made him curious.
Sure, let's continue.
Yes, let's.
Andrew had also crossed the line of danger to get this far. Adjusting his stance slightly, Andrew took a step forward. Several exchanges followed, but naturally Enkrid won. At one point, Andrew closed the distance and even tried to shoulder tackle him, but Enkrid skillfully countered.
Have you learned wrestling? Or some form of Auden? The soldier who resembles a bear?
Yes.
Auden taught you, didn't he?
Andrew knew that Enkrid learned things from his subordinate soldiers. Despite having his technique, which he had spent years developing, broken, Andrew felt a sense of relief. Honestly, there hadn't been anyone lately who could push him like this. Since surpassing Mac, there was no one left to spar with in peace. Even as a baron, after aligning with Krang's faction, he had found himself isolated like on an island. Everyone around him formed cliques and factions, but he was alone. He was desperate to compete with knights or skilled warriors. Lately, his abilities seemed to have stagnated as well. In this situation, Enkrid's arrival was like rain during a drought. It went beyond relief. He felt a surge of excitement.
Stay a few more days before you leave.
This proposal came out naturally. The eyes of the 5 Gardner family trainees watching also lit up. It was a sparring match from which they could learn a lot just by observing. Even if they couldn't fully grasp it, it was clear that a skilled person like Enkrid had some connection to their lord. Surely they could glean something, even if only scraps. Enkrid glanced at the 5 eager-eyed trainees. From his perspective, at their current level, they should be spending their days swinging practice swords. It wasn't time to learn techniques yet. They needed to master the basics first. But should he ignore their enthusiasm? Old memories stirred in him. Specifically, memories of when he had first come to the capital.
You want to learn swordsmanship? That'll be 10 gold coins.
The swordsmanship instructor had been an arrogant bastard, too busy sneering. He had boasted that he was 1 step below platinum in the mercenary world, and that if he had stayed a mercenary, he would have become a platinum-ranked one. Though it wasn't entirely boasting, the instructor was indeed highly skilled.
Hey, I'll teach you one technique, but bring that serving girl from earlier to Van's house tonight.
He had also proven the saying that skill and character don't always go hand in hand. Enkrid had refused, and he had been beaten nearly to death for it. No, the instructor had intended to kill him, but by sheer luck, Enkrid had survived. He was fortunate. A few passing guards had seen and intervened. It had been pure luck that those guards happened to be passing through that alleyway. In those memories of the past, Enkrid saw his former self in these young men. Turning away from someone with such a desire to learn was something Enkrid couldn't do. Just as Andrew was now showing his passionate eyes, the 5 Gardner trainees seemed to burn with the same enthusiasm. Enkrid couldn't bring himself to ignore them.
All right, I'll stay.
What? You're staying? Then make us something tasty. You're a noble after all.
Dunbachel reacted the moment she heard. As for the others, they seemed indifferent whether they stayed or left. Thus, they decided to stay a few more days. Enkrid respected their eagerness, and so he began right away, determined to respond to their passion and enthusiasm.
1,000 downward slashes.
What?
One of the trainees, a freckled girl with a ponytail standing at the front, asked again.
1,100.
Andrew had experienced Enkrid before. These people weren't called madmen for nothing. He quickly caught on.
Do as he says, begin.
At Andrew's command, the trainees began to pick up their swords one by one. As they all started to clumsily swing their swords, Enkrid opened his mouth again, somewhere between instruction and admonishment, with a hint of harassment. At least, that's how the trainees perceived it.
Swing with the resolve to cut down your opponent with full strength. Got it? Your stance is sloppy. Are you even putting strength in your thighs?
As he spoke, he struck the trainee's thigh with the flat of his gladius. The trainee let out a yelp of pain.
And you scream over this?
Enkrid knew the pain of wanting to learn but being unable to. He had decided to stay here and do something for these trainees. This was the first step, drilling them in the fundamentals. The harsher it was, the easier their next step would be. He knew that from experience. A lack of determination? That could be fixed. with hands, feet, and rem.
Rem.
I'll help out.
Dunbachel, sensing the atmosphere, grabbed one of the trainees.
Hey, is now the time to be rolling your eyes? Should I pluck them out for you?
She did as Rem had taught her, extending her nails and pretending to pick at them in front of the trainee's face. The trainee's complexion turned pale.
Captain?
Andrew couldn't understand why things had suddenly taken this turn, and the idea that this was out of goodwill, he found that even harder to believe. But now wasn't the time to tell them to stop. He glanced over the trainees for a moment and then gave up. After all, if they could endure this torment, they would improve. They would grow stronger. He had personally experienced how much things changed after being beaten up by Rem, that barbarian. And so, Enkrid settled in at Andrew's estate for a while. Each morning he practiced the isolation technique, followed by training and sparring. Enkrid quickly established his routine.
Ragna, come out. I've chosen you.
Very well. They had built a large training field behind the mansion, and because of this there seemed to be no garden. It was impressive. Enkrid was satisfied. The mansion's cook prepared meals every day, and the food wasn't bad. Esther had become infatuated with a wool cushion. She had transformed into a panther and refused to leave the cushion. The odd-eyed horse also seemed quite pleased with the place. He had taken to acting like the leader among a few horses and even seemed to be roaming between the mares at night. He was truly a stallion. Enkrid maintained his routine, eating, drinking, resting, and training all day. In the meantime, a few trainees contemplated desertion.
This kind of opportunity doesn't come often.
Andrew managed to talk them out of it. Even he was pale-faced from the relentless training. Since Enkrid had been putting Andrew through intense training from dawn, it was no surprise. The sight of Andrew trembling as he spoke gave his words a sense of credibility and sincerity. The training Andrew was undergoing was no joke either. It all began with a single comment from Enkrid.
Your body seems a bit scrawny. You've gained some flab.
Though it was a ridiculous statement, Andrew couldn't argue. Having seen Enkrid's body during their shared baths, Andrew knew it was a weapon in itself. Especially that third leg. It was truly like a weapon.
This isn't fair.
Andrew muttered to himself.
What? Nothing.
And so the grueling training continued. 2 days later, Rem finally asked,
But is it right to come all the way to the capital just to train?
Truthfully, Rem knew Enkrid well enough to understand that this was exactly something he'd do. So why bring it up now?
Why?
Aren't you going to check out the capital?
I was thinking of going out this afternoon to get some armor.
Ragna chimed in. Wasn't it enough fun to just train and spar? Enkrid thought so, but he respected everyone's wishes.
Ragna, make sure to take a servant with you. Stay within 5 paces at all times.
That's unnecessary.
I'm saying this because I don't know when I'll see you again if you go out now.
The capital may be complicated, but I've already memorized the streets.
Ragna shook his head, attempting to refuse.
Sure you have.
Is he insane?
Did you hit your head?
Jackson, Rem, and Dunbachel all chimed in.
When he says take someone, take someone.
Enkrid was firm. Ragna had no choice but to agree in the end.
I'm going out, bit of fun too. What are we doing just sitting here?
Do as you like.
Enkrid planned to stay for another 3 or 4 days before leaving. Jackson had gone out on the first day, claiming he had some business to attend to. Dunbachel, after watching silently for a while, also decided to move.
I'm going to find a sword. Mine's in bad shape.
Her scimitar's blade had become quite damaged, far beyond the help of a whetstone. Since they were in the capital, there would be good steel and plenty of weapons. Even if she couldn't have a new one made, she could probably find a sword that suited her hand. Enkrid thought it would be hard to find a weapon better than the one he already had. Besides, today wasn't his only opportunity. More importantly, he felt it was right to spend time with these people, filled with passion and desire, much like he had been in the past.
You live here, so I suppose you don't need to go out.
Enkrid gave the remaining trainees what felt like a death sentence.
Aren't you going to check out the capital?
One of the trainees gathered the courage to ask.
Aren't you going?
I'm not.
Enkrid responded firmly once again.
Progress.
Moving forward. That was the key. Even though he was teaching these trainees, Enkrid never neglected his own training. In fact, it was quite the opposite. They say you learn by teaching.
Basics.
He never forgot the importance of the basics. When he first came to the capital, he had heard it so much it felt like his ears would bleed.
The basics. If you don't even have those down, what can you do?
A solid foundation was necessary to move forward, and Enkrid stuck to that principle. While teaching the 5 trainees, he reinforced his own knowledge. It was an unexpected stroke of fortune. Teaching allowed him to reflect and realize a direction better than mere pondering. Moreover, he had recently learned a lot. Odin's concentrated burst technique, Ragnar's swift yet heavy sword style, Rem's mastery of any weapon, Dunbachel's full-body, flexible swordsmanship, and Teresa's shield techniques. He had absorbed much. There hadn't been time to fully digest it all, but did he really need to master everything? His thoughts spiraled from one to the next. He was getting lost in this mental flow, eager to dive deep into what he was realizing. His sense of evasion from the gate of sixth sense triggered. There was no need to turn his head. An arrow. He tracked its trajectory by sound and twisted his body halfway. The incoming arrow landed in Enkrid's hand. He looked up at the wall. In broad daylight there stood a madman brazenly aiming at him.
"What do you want?"
Enkrid asked. Catching the incoming arrow could be considered a stunt. It would be a feat even if you knew it was coming, but this time it came suddenly and from behind. Not only did he sense it, but he didn't dodge. He caught it. It was a result of the harmony between his sense of skill and focus.
Wow, what is this?
2 of the trainees' mouths dropped open. The remaining 3 were speechless. They had every reason to be astonished. One was in awe of catching the arrow, and the other was shocked that the arrow had suddenly flown at them. Enkrid looked toward the top of the outer wall. There was a figure, face covered, standing there, not even bothering to conceal their presence. The narrow width of the wall didn't seem to bother them as they stood with perfect balance. It was proof of their excellent sense of equilibrium. Their clothing was ordinary, a loose shirt and pants that reached down to the ankles. Perhaps they weren't wearing black because it wasn't nighttime, but they did have a mask on. Enkrid tilted his head slightly, puzzled. The figure didn't take any further action after throwing the arrow, almost as if waiting for a response.
"Now then."
Just as the figure opened their mouth, Enkrid immediately threw the arrow he had caught. With a sharp ping, the arrow flew back toward the figure. It was the Valen mercenary sword technique, strike while speaking. The arrow, thrown using an adapted technique, shot towards the figure, who swiftly dodged to the side, moving horizontally.
Their body is light.
Even as he thought this, Enkrid's hands moved on their own. He had thrown the arrow as bait, and now he threw another dagger. It was a whistle dagger, incredibly rare and hard to come by, but he used one now. With a sharp sound, the whistle dagger flew at terrifying speed, forcing the figure on the wall to retreat and tumble backward. Enkrid's right foot pressed against the ground. He bent his knee, gaining momentum. While this description breaks it down, of course everything happened in an instant. Enkrid shot forward, creating a crater in the dirt training ground as he launched himself. In proportion to the hole left in the ground, his body flew forward at terrifying speed. To the trainees, even his afterimage barely registered.
That lunatic!
A voice came from beyond the wall, but Enkrid ignored it as he jumped toward the top of the wall. Though not fully armed, he still carried 3 swords. The 5 trainees, who had been watching in stunned silence, now gaped even wider. Despite wearing leather armor and carrying 3 swords, he jumped lightly onto the wall as if it were effortless. It almost seemed like a cheat, some sort of mysticism, trickery, magic, or something similar. Enkrid hooked his fingertips over the edge of the wall and pulled himself up with ease. How is he doing that? Is it magic? The trainees' heads were filled with confusion. Around this time, Esther, who had woken up, watched with sleepy eyes. Of course, there was no magic involved. It was just sheer physical prowess, throwing all limits to the wind. Enkrid lifted himself up smoothly, and in the meantime, 2 figures waiting behind the wall drew short swords. They jumped, swinging their blades toward Enkrid's wrist. Just as Enkrid had lifted himself halfway up the wall, he let go with his left hand. Whoosh, whoosh! The 2 blades aiming for his hand sliced through empty air, and in the meantime, Enkrid grabbed the wall again with his right hand and pulled himself up. His body surged upward, As he floated into the air, he saw the two figures below begin to panic. Their eyes, their pupils, shook. With the sun at his back, it looked as though a dark shadow had suddenly appeared to them.
Wait.
One of the figures shouted, but it didn't matter. Why should he care about showing mercy to those who attacked first? Enkrid twisted his body in midair, drawing a gladius with his right hand and gripping Ember in his left. To the attackers, it looked as if light was shooting from Enkrid's eyes. With the sun behind him, it added to the eerie effect. What happened next occurred in the blink of an eye as Enkrid's hands moved. The dark shadow, the glowing eyes, and the two beams of physical threat split the air viciously in opposite directions. With his right hand, he slashed as soon as he drew his sword. With his left hand, he stabbed the moment he pulled his blade. Two different sword techniques struck the two opponents simultaneously. The one on the right barely managed to block with their sword, but the one on the left had no such luck. The blade pierced their left shoulder. They were lucky it wasn't worse. It was the result of Enkrid incorporating his recent realization into the attack.
Still lacking.
Enkrid realized that in his left hand he had to infuse the will of the moment, and in his right hand the crushing sword. He reflected on this as he taught and fought off the attackers. The path he was meant to follow was becoming clearer. As he landed on the ground with a thud, one knee touching the earth, Enkrid lifted his head, a smile unconsciously forming on his face. Is there ever a time not to learn? Every moment. Everything is a teacher and a lesson. He learned something from the power exuded from Krang's back, and from Andrew's refined techniques, he learned how to mix swordsmanship with wrestling. There was much to learn here as well. Enkrid felt satisfied just with the fact that he had come all the way to the capital and protected Krang. He had always been that kind of person. However, from the opposite perspective, it was something terrifying. Leaping over a wall in one swift movement, cutting one man with a short sword midair, piercing another's shoulder, and then landing while smiling. The light in his eyes could easily be mistaken for madness.
That bastard is insane.
One of the attackers shouted. Enkrid had no interest in what they were shouting. Who were they? His instincts were sharp, but now he was certain.
Is there any difference from the ones before?
There wasn't much difference. In that case, he just had to cut them down. The group felt no different from the assassins who had attacked along the way. They were from the same group. With this in mind, he moved just before taking action. These men were assassins, well trained in their techniques. Especially skilled in reading their opponent's intent, they quickly spoke as Enkrid closed in.
Stop.
It was a cry filled with urgency, but of course it was in vain. They were already deemed as enemies. The distance closed. It was hard to even register when he moved, and when he finished moving, he was that fast. At the same time, a long line was drawn above their heads. There were 3 attackers in total, but the only one still unscathed was the one who had shot the arrow from the wall. It was this unscathed one who shouted, "Stop!" But no sooner had the shout ended than a blade fell from above. To the attacker, it seemed as if the space between them suddenly vanished, with a sword cutting down toward them.
Shit.
There wasn't even time to curse out loud. He drew his sword upward as quickly as he could. What he held in his hands were 2 curved scimitars, his signature weapons. Originally, he had been an influential figure within the Assassin's Guild.
I'll block it and deflect it.
The moment he made up his mind, the 2 scimitars rose to meet the incoming streak of light.
I blocked it.
But strangely, the moment the light met his blades, it felt as if time was stretching out. This gave him room for more thoughts. However, there was no time to ponder the mystery. He focused entirely on blocking.
It was fast.
Realization dawned on him. The angle of his draw, the way he gripped the swords, how he applied force.
Yes, that's how it should be done.
The proper way to swing a weapon, the right way to apply strength, it all came back to him. But why hadn't he felt any impact yet? As he stared at the streak of light, he saw it was slowly descending. The blade was tracing a perfect, unwavering line downwards. Finally, the light, which he had perceived as a beam, connected with his 2 weapons. That was as far as his thoughts went. Crack, crack, crash! Enkrid had imbued his sword strike with the will of the moment. What does speed truly rely on?
Speed comes from properly contracting your muscles, that's all. Those idiots who just bulk up without understanding it are all useless, absolutely useless.
Rem had once said.
It's all about the muscles, brother.
Auden had said it, muscles specifically, muscles that know how to be properly used and controlled, from the muscles of the right thigh, waist, abs, shoulders, forearms, all the way to the grip, every muscle contracted, adding explosive speed. By twisting his ankle and waist, centrifugal force was added to the sword, which descended from above. Once everything aligned, the falling sword was like a bolt of lightning. It was a sword strike that reinterpreted Ragnar's thunderstrike in his own way. It was a blow that only someone at the level of a knight could hope to block. This was the will of a downward strike, not a thrust. So naturally, this was the result. The bolt of lightning, fueled by trained muscles, pushed the two curved blades downward. The first explosive sound came from the clash of metal. The following cracking sound was from the attacker's hands and arm bones breaking as they gripped the scimitars. The final crash was the dull part of the scimitars being pushed back and colliding with the collarbone. Enkrid crushed his opponent with a single blow.
Whew.
As he exhaled deeply, still in that position, the remaining two attackers didn't dare make a move. One of them, the one with the hole in his shoulder, had a vial of 10 breaths poison in his hand, but he couldn't move. Enkrid, standing with his back to the shadow cast by the wall, let out his breath, which rose like steam from his lips. The sudden burst of heat from his body was due to the rapid movements.
Stop, wait. Do you have something to say?
Enkrid finally spoke.
Damn, he sure took his time asking.
Thought the attacker who had broken 2 finger bones while blocking the gladius, as he slowly stood up and spoke.
We came to give you a warning.
A warning?
Was it just his imagination? Or did it feel more like they had come to get beaten up? Enkrid looked at them as if telling them to continue.
Gah. We came to tell you that this is not where you belong. You need to go back.
This came from the one with the hole in his left shoulder.
You were the ones who attacked first. It was a level you could dodge. Are you kidding me? Given what's happened so far, even if I cut both your heads off, you wouldn't have a right to complain.
The moment he finished speaking, the one with the pierced shoulder threw a smoke bomb at the ground. Poof! Smoke erupted. Watching this, Enkrid thought to himself that they were really underestimating him. Do they really think that if they throw a smoke bomb and attack, it'll work on me? He retrieved Ember, extended the gladius forward, and swung it, using the flat side to create a gust of wind. Once physical force exceeds a certain limit, it's no different from magic. The smoke was blown aside. Enkrid expected the attackers to continue their assault. They always had up until now, but this time his expectation was wrong.
I let my guard down.
Enkrid admitted it. He hadn't expected them to flee, but they had all run away.
What the hell was that?
Andrew came running out of the mansion belatedly, fully armed. Behind him, the 5 trainees followed, along with Mac. Though he had transitioned into a butler's role, it was clear that he hadn't neglected his training. Given the atmosphere in the capital, it wasn't the time to lay down one's sword and rest easy. This place was filled with countless irritations.
They're already gone.
Andrew quickly caught on that there had been attackers. His eyes turned toward the corpse.
And who is that?
He attacked, took a hit, and died.
Enkrid responded casually. The man's arms and bones were shattered, his collarbone broken. His organs were damaged from the impact, and his heart was struck by the back of his own weapon, sending him across the river to the afterlife.
But I will keep moving forward. This is ridiculous. In broad daylight jumping over a noble's wall? Not even at night?
Andrew remarked, glancing at the dead man and the remnants of the smoke bomb, his voice tinged with anger. Enkrid was piecing the situation together. They were part of an assassin group. Why did they strike now?
Jackson is away, everyone's scattered.
There couldn't have been a better time than this. And what did that mean?
They're watching.
Beside him, Andrew ground his teeth.
These bastards.
His pride was wounded, and his anger was clear. Enkrid wiped the blood off his sword and sheathed it, running his hand through his hair. Until just a moment ago, it hadn't been bad. There had been realizations, after all. For people like Ragna and Rem, breaking through walls dozens of times in a single day might be nothing, but for Enkrid, repeating things today was a matter of luck aligning in his favor. Suddenly, a thought crossed his mind. couldn't he pull that luck in his favor more deliberately? To do that, he first needed to understand the current situation.
What about the knights or the knight orders?
This was the core issue. He asked it directly. Andrew bit his lower lip, visibly trembling. What does the kingdom's strength rely on? Of course, it's the knights. If there weren't any knights or they couldn't train them, it would be no surprise if Aspen crushed them. Localized conflicts weren't the real issue. If Naurilia's forces had even slightly faltered, Aspen would have immediately deployed its full strength and crossed the border. The only reason they hadn't broken through the border guard was because the Knight Orders existed. Aspen had assessed that if they pushed for a full-scale conflict and risked national decline, they might still lose in the end. Understanding and predicting the situation, that was what mattered now. Enkrid thought about this as he assessed the situation.
This kind of thing is really Big Eyes' specialty.
But with him not around, what could he do? If you have no teeth, you have to chew with your gums.
But I will keep moving forward. Do you know the current state of the kingdom?
Andrew thought for a moment before asking in return.
Do you?
Nope.
Enkrid answered cheerfully, as if it didn't concern him in the least. Seeing this, Andrew began to understand why Krang held such high regard for this crazy commander. How many people could admit they didn't know something when they didn't? There was an unshakable, upright, and firm quality about him. And his skill?
A monster, he's a monster.
It was almost as if one would be curious about the final moments of the fallen corpse. Why does that bastard look like he's smirking? It was because, in the moment of death, enlightenment had come to him along with his life flashing before his eyes. Of course, Andrew couldn't know that.
There isn't a single knight in the capital right now. Let's go inside and discuss the details.
This wasn't a conversation for the trainees to hear.
Mac.
Andrew called as he turned away.
Yes, I'll handle things.
Mac replied, though his complexion looked awful. Enkrid thought it was only natural. If he had to serve a lord who had bet everything on an obviously losing hand, he'd have a headache too. Though Enkrid hadn't heard everything, he could sense enough.
Isn't this an unwinnable fight?
It was obvious without needing to think deeply. From Krang's perspective, it was one peril after another. It made Enkrid wonder whether it might have been better to build strength outside first, then return later with more troops to crush the enemy by force.
What happened? Something going on?
Rem returned before evening.
There's nothing good.
Dunbachel was with him, and a bit later Ragna arrived.
Why does he keep claiming he knows all the shortcuts when it's his first time in the capital?
The servant who had accompanied them was drenched in sweat, though it wasn't even a particularly hot day. Sending the servant along had been a stroke of genius after all. Lastly, Jackson returned.
Where do you keep wandering off to?
Rem said, giving him a sideways glance. They had all gathered in the lounge on the first floor used as a reception room. Though Rem himself had been out and about, he seemed to have already forgotten about it. That's just how Rem was. Jackson completely ignored the comment. He didn't even glance over or acknowledge it. While Jackson often ignored remarks, this time it was as if he didn't care at all, like it didn't even register with him. Instead, he turned his gaze to Enkrid. Enkrid noticed and spoke up.
You're back?
Jackson nodded. To Enkrid, it seemed like Jackson was deep in thought about something. It was subtle, something you wouldn't notice without strong intuition.
Is something on your mind?
Enkrid asked.
No.
The answer came immediately. That, too, was strange. Normally, Jackson would have responded with something like,
Should there be something on my mind?
Or,
It seems like there's something going on here, not with me.
But this time, nothing. Why? Enkrid was curious, but doubted asking more would get a proper answer. If Jackson were that forthcoming, their platoon wouldn't have earned its reputation as the Madmen platoon. For now,
Andrew, continue.
It was more important to hear the explanation. Whether they acted on it or not, they at least needed to understand the situation.
The biggest problem in the capital right now is the factions. The groups that were fighting each other are now even preparing for war.
Andrew spoke within the limits of what he knew, and Enkrid added what Rem had told him and pieced it all together in his mind.
There's nothing useful here. It's like everyone's just selling junk.
That was Rem's comment after checking out the capital's market. There were plenty of people and goods, but when it came to buying something,
I'm sorry, this is already ordered by so-and-so from such-and-such house.
it was all treated like military supplies. Weapons and food weren't circulating smoothly. And what does that imply?
It means they're stationing their own armies nearby.
They'd likely summon their forces inside the capital if things went south. The issue was that this wasn't happening with the Queen's approval.
Even the Royal Guard has splintered into several factions. It's become such a joke.
A joke.
Enkrid had a habit of asking what joke. Whenever someone said something was funny, it was his way of showing the best posture for the speaker. Andrew continued without pause.
Yes, a joke. Yes, they're assassinating each other, and then some inquisitor shows up and arrests people for heresy. Lately, you can even hear strange animal cries at night. And every few days, someone goes missing.
This is the capital.
Yes, it's the capital. I know. It's a big city. People go missing frequently in a place this large, but this is unusual. And there's no commander to properly investigate these assassinations or disappearances. The gatekeepers at each city gate are doing their best. But what can they do when their hands are tied?
Enkrid folded his arms. He could see Andrew's face redden over the old table. It wasn't something he could talk about calmly. Enkrid asked the flushed face a question.
And what about the royal bloodline coming here amidst all this?
It's like pouring fuel on the fire. The faction nobles, who've been watching and waiting, now have a reason to draw their swords. It's clear what their goal is. They say they came to end the factional struggle and entered the capital for that purpose.
End the struggle? Naturally, the question arose.
How?
That was the only thing worth wondering about. Andrew raised both hands and shrugged.
I don't know the method.
Krang would handle Krang's matters, so what should he do? What had he expected most when he decided to come to the capital?
Will I have to return without even meeting a single knight?
He was looking for a chance to fight, to train, to open his eyes to something new. That was it. Listening to Andrew quietly, he couldn't help but think that the hidden warriors of the factional nobles would soon come out. They would fight. They would fight for their lives. The thought stirred a sense of anticipation in him. Just as he had learned while teaching students, there would be new opportunities if he went to the royal palace. If thinking too hard didn't lead to an answer, sometimes it was best to simply follow one's heart. That's what Enkrid decided to do, stand by the side of a friend he liked and join in the sword dance. He made the decision based on someone's warning. Was this an impulsive decision?
What are you thinking about so much?
Rem asked from beside him. He was the type to go along with whatever Enkrid decided.
I was just thinking, maybe I should cut off the Queen's head and become a faction noble myself.
When he said whatever came to mind.
What, you want to start a fight? Sounds good. I like it.
This madman seemed to hear nothing but the part about wanting to fight. Typical Rem.
What did you just say?
Just kidding.
Only after calming down a startled Andrew. As Enkrid began mentally organizing his tasks, he felt a chilling sensation brush his back. He turned naturally. In the corner of the reception room, leaning against a pillar and half hidden in the shadows, stood Jackson.
Hey, wanna take a walk?
From the look in his eyes, it seemed like if he left him alone, he would cause trouble. When was the last time he saw eyes like that? Right before Rem and Jackson's emotions escalated to the extreme, right when they were about to draw their swords, that's when he saw those eyes. In other words, Jackson looked like he was about to draw his sword. But why? Did Jackson also get attacked? No, it was something else. Enkrid instinctively understood.
It's because I said we should go to the royal palace.
That must be it.
Sure.
Jackson replied and began walking outside. Was it just his imagination, or did Jackson seem to be holding back some impulse?
Is he on drugs or something?
Rem muttered.
I'll be back.
With that, Enkrid left. Enkrid followed behind Jackson. They stepped outside the mansion and walked between the shadows. The wind whistled by, scattering their hair. Soon the two were walking side by side. Enkrid nodded as he glanced at the moonlight, starlight, and the distant glow of a brazier. They walked along the mansion wall on the dark night road.
I have something I must do.
Jackson spoke first.
Yeah.
Enkrid nodded. Whatever it was, Jackson would handle it.
I need to do something for that, but it's a bit troublesome and I'm conflicted.
Conflicted.
Not a word that seemed to suit Jackson. Enkrid thought for a moment. He had a feeling Jackson had something to say, but what could he actually do to help?
It's about killing someone.
Jackson said. Well, yeah, of course. Given the current mood, that seemed even more likely. So what was he supposed to say? After a moment of thought, Enkrid spoke.
Do your best.
Jackson wasn't the type to ask for help, and he usually handled things on his own, so there wasn't much else to say. Enkrid nodded and patted Jackson on the shoulder. After giving his shoulder a couple of firm taps, Enkrid thought Jackson's eyes seemed calmer than before, and turned around to head back inside. Jackson, watching this, stopped in his tracks. He stared at his leader's back, the figure moving forward under the starlight and moonlight.
I knew he wasn't normal.
It was a thought that struck him anew. And he's giving me encouragement?
Because he trusts me.
Was it trust? Confidence? Could that be the reason? Jackson's eyes flickered with uncertainty once more. Meanwhile, Enkrid was deep in thought as he walked. If Rem or Ragna caused trouble, it would be a public spectacle, but not Jackson. There was a reason people called him a sneaky alley cat. Jackson would do what he needed to do, quietly, discreetly, that's what Enkrid thought. As he turned to leave, a voice came from behind.
It's about vengeance and revenge,
Jackson said. His voice was at just the right volume to reach Enkrid's ears.
What?
Enkrid turned around. He was the type to listen carefully whenever someone had something to say, and this was no different. Fully turning his body around, he took on a posture that asked,
Are you really about to say something?
When Jackson simply stared back silently, Enkrid instinctively moved toward 2 stones by the mansion wall. He sat down and pulled out some seasoned jerky and a flask from his belt. Was this thorough preparation, or just coincidence? The flask gave off the scent of alcohol. It wasn't sweet apple cider, but strong brandy. Jackson took the flask, raised it to his lips, and took a gulp. As the hot liquid coursed down his throat, a fiery warmth rose from his stomach back to his throat. It was strong liquor. Of course, Jackson wasn't going to get drunk. He had chewed poisonous herbs since childhood to build resistance. A body that could withstand poison wouldn't be affected by alcohol. Suddenly, memories of chewing and swallowing those toxic plants to endure came flooding back. What had been the driving force that allowed him to survive it all? Death was the beginning of it. The death of his family, his parents, everyone he knew. He had witnessed death and wielded it as a weapon that had been the path of his life. Enkrid took back the flask, took a sip, and asked,
Who is your enemy?
There was an organization called the Black Lily.
Jackson began his story slowly. It was simple, as if there was no sadness at all in his words. The story unfolded like that. His father was cruel, and his mother was merciless.
If necessary, stab even your friend's back.
That was what his father had said, and it became his father's final words. After that, Jackson lived by that command. If necessary, he would stab anyone's back.
What a ruthless bastard.
Then he met a mentor. He went through many experiences, and before long his position had changed. He had lived a life chewing on poisonous herbs and carving scars across his entire body. The path Jackson had walked was drenched in blood. No, he had carved a path with blood and walked it. Step after step, he kept walking. Jackson was the scion of a noble house. Jackson Vencino, that was his name. The Vencino family was quite an influential noble house. They ventured it into the trade business and succeeded greatly. But his father desired even more. Was that the mistake? Who knows? Jackson decided not to dwell on who was right or wrong. He set a simple, clear goal: revenge. He would kill everyone involved.
Hey, you're gonna die young if you keep that up.
His mentor had scolded him for that. Jackson didn't listen. He walked a single, unwavering path.
When is that one ever going to become human? Is that something someone who runs an assassination guild should say?
He remembered how his mentor had chuckled at that reply.
Yeah, better to get angry. That looks better on you.
It was a trivial conversation. His goal was clear. He gathered information and investigated. His family had fallen. Was it because of a series of unfortunate events? Not even close. It had been someone's scheme. Jackson decided to hold the person responsible for that scheme accountable. That's how he found the name, the Black Lily. It was the name of the organization. And what had they done together? Their goal was to line their own pockets. Some of them became bandits under a vicious lord. Others became nobles of a nation, and some disappeared like smoke. The first one Jackson found had lost everything, throwing his life into the gutter and sinking into despair.
Why did you do it?
He was curious. They had ruined a noble house and devoured several trade guilds. Many people had died because of the Black Lily. There must have been a reason.
Reason? Fuck that.
The disgraced power holder laughed bitterly.
Do you know how much we could make by tearing apart the Vencino family? You idiot. Everyone lives by screwing over others.
The man who had given up on everything didn't even value his own life. Was killing him perhaps an act of mercy? Would sending him to hell be something he'd thank Jackson for? Killing him with a simple slash to the throat would have been a blessing. But Jackson didn't want that. He didn't kill him with his own hands. Instead, he severed the tendons in the man's limbs and threw him into the slums. 4 days later, he was torn apart and eaten alive. That year, due to a drought, people killed over a handful of wheat. With even roots being precious, survival in the slums was impossible. The man's last words lingered in Jackson's ears. Everyone lives by screwing over others. That man had been a friend of Jackson's cruel father, or rather, he used to be.
If you keep looking forward, there's no need to look back.
His mother's merciless words also remained in his heart. Does anything go as long as it's for your goal? If that's what it takes, then so be it. It took him several more years to find the ringleaders of the Black Lily, and in the meantime, his mentor died. He would never understand his mentor's final words, so he chose to forget them. He never recalled them again. He buried them.
If necessary, stab even your friends back. Just keep looking forward.
Instead, Jackson recalled his father's and mother's words. Their words tangled and intertwined in his mind.
Everyone lives by screwing over others.
The dead man's words mixed in as well. After that, Jackson killed 4 of the ringleaders of the Black Lily. It wasn't until he was hunting down the 5th one that he discovered that one of the ringleaders had specifically targeted the Vencino family. Could this be his true enemy? He didn't know their name or identity. Through a few clues and deductions, he was led to Avner. Avner had directed him to the royal palace of Narilia, and so Jackson had come. While Enkrid was being attacked and Rem, Dunbachel, and Ragna were wandering the marketplace, complaining about the poor quality of goods, Jackson entered a mansion in the residential area. The old mansion was covered in cobwebs, with barely any signs of habitation. There, he saw the one who had lured him in, a white-haired man with a monocle. His body was frail, but he carried a cane sword, and his eyes were so narrow that it was impossible to read his gaze. Jackson knew immediately. They were the same type, professionals in the same business.
You're from Geor's dagger, aren't you?
The man guessed Jackson's origin. Of course, that was expected. It was information Jackson had deliberately let slip to get this far. Geor's dagger was the top assassination guild across the entire continent. Even so, the man showed no fear. Was it confidence in his own skills? No, it was because he believed he had Jackson at a disadvantage.
I know what you're looking for.
The white-haired man spoke.
What is it?
Jackson asked. His brown eyes, tinged with faint red in the darkness, seemed to absorb the shadows.
You're the last heir of the Vencino family, aren't you?
Ah, yes, he should at least know that much.
I can give you all the information you seek. Everything, no matter what it is.
Jackson waited for his next words.
In return, stab him.
There was no need to ask who him referred to. The man with the black hair and blue eyes, the commander of Jackson's unit.
Stab Enkrid.
It was a request to kill the man he called his captain. In exchange, he would receive the information he had spent his entire life searching for. Enkrid sat quietly, gazing at the moon. The flask in his hand made a sloshing sound as the liquid inside swirled. Jackson, watching him, spoke of revenge and his enemies. One of them was inside the royal palace, and he needed to enter and find him. He left out the part about meeting the white-haired professional.
All right, let's find him.
Enkrid spoke. There was no smile. It wasn't a joke, he meant it. His words were filled with sincerity. It was clear he wanted to help. If Jackson didn't refuse, he would aid him. He would do everything he could. Jackson knew that. That's the kind of person he was. But could they really find someone after all this time, just by trying harder? This was someone Jackson hadn't been able to track down, no matter how much he wandered. A much easier path lay before Jackson. His father's, his mother's, and his first enemy's words flashed through his mind.
If necessary, stab even your friends back. Just keep looking forward. There's no need to look back.
Everyone lives by screwing over others.
It was the path Jackson had walked all his life. A path paved with blood, swords, and poison. A path he could easily continue walking if he chose to. Silent stab. It was Jackson's specialty. No presence, no force. The blade, Advancing without a sound was simply fulfilling its original purpose. It was born to stab, slash, and tear flesh, and so it would be used for that. The silently advancing blade aimed at Enkrid's back. If he drove it in like this, the mission would be complete.
Want to spar?
Jackson found himself staring into Enkrid's eyes, who had already turned around. The sword executing the silent stab halted, frozen in mid-action as Jackson extended his right hand forward.
Did he sense it and react?
That meant the silent stab had been broken. At some point, Enkrid had drawn his silver longsword and lightly struck the halted blade. It was a formality, nothing more. Jackson quickly pulled the deflected sword back in front of him. The vibration from the blade transmitted through his body.
I named it Silver, my sword.
Enkrid spoke as he raised the sword upright. The blade caught the moonlight, reflecting it at a slight angle. As Jackson gazed at it, he realized what had just happened. The silent stab wasn't broken. He simply hadn't executed it.
I didn't want to.
He hadn't put his full intent into it. He hadn't completely erased his presence. Why?
Jackson.
His name was called. From Enkrid's eyes, reflecting the moonlight, a blue light gleamed. The aura from the sword in his hand surged. Enkrid's shoulders shifted ever so slightly. Jackson responded immediately. From the stance, he predicted the incoming attack and retreated. Enkrid's sword, which he had named Silver, cut a short arc where Jackson had just been standing. With his right hand gripping the hilt and his left holding the ricasso, Enkrid had drawn a short, controlled stroke. It was an attack that could only come from trusting the sharpness of the blade. Instead of using centrifugal force for the slash, he had relied on the blade's inherent sharpness.
If you let your guard down, you'll lose a part of yourself.
Enkrid's voice rang out, his blue eyes, visible between the sword he held in both hands, pierced through the night's darkness. It was a voice filled with presence, eyes filled with presence. Jackson took in that presence and analyzed his opponent's attack. After taking everything in within a brief moment, Jackson finally spoke.
You're taking advantage of the weapon's strength?
In a usual situation, it would have been time for action, not words. But Jackson opened his mouth to speak. Though he was aware that he was acting differently than usual, he didn't dwell on it. So, he just did whatever felt right. Was this for the mission, or was it for revenge? Was stabbing him in the back the right thing?
Doesn't matter.
In his mind, Jackson recalled Enkrid's usual tone and mimicked it. He wasn't even consciously aware he was doing it. Enkrid exhaled with a soft huff. His breath seemed to materialize in the moonlight, showing the intensity he carried.
I'm serious. If I go easy on you, you'll get hurt, Jackson.
Enkrid wasn't the same as before. This man had changed. He was nothing like when they had first met. What had Jackson seen in that man who once swung his sword silently and without a word? That person who had been beaten and knocked around everywhere, a superior in name only, was gone. Now his body seemed twice as large as before. Jackson threw his sword to the ground. The blade sank into the earth with a thud. Then he drew another weapon, a stiletto.
That?
Enkrid recognized it. It was the item that Leona Rockfried had wagered and eventually won, the item given without hesitation. It was a stiletto from the Carmen collection. Jackson gazed indifferently at the stiletto's blade. Did he give it knowing its value? At that time, there hadn't been any ulterior motive visible in Enkrid. With the tip of the gifted blade, Jackson aimed at the one who had given it to him.
Don't let your guard down. I'm asking you.
An ask, a word Jackson had never spoken before. Enkrid's lips twisted. A chuckle escaped him.
Half a life.
Enkrid spoke. It meant that this was going to be dangerous. It was also an indication that this duel was different from the ones before. Enkrid's eyes, blazing fiercely, were locked straight ahead. The two locked eyes, and Jackson let his arms drop. At that moment, a silent throwing knife flew towards Enkrid's forehead. The sense of evasion, a technique of heightened instincts, activated. Even though the attack couldn't be seen or heard, he was able to dodge it, operating in the realm of the sixth sense. Enkrid sensed it and avoided it. He tilted his head, letting the sharp, soundless blade slide past. Just then, another throwing knife was on its way, aimed at where Enkrid had dodged.
A time delay.
It was the tangam style, specifically the knife-throwing technique Jackson had personally taught. But Enkrid hadn't expected Jackson to start with that right off the bat. You can't predict everything. Though he didn't foresee it, his body reacted. Enkrid used his sword's blade as a shield and blocked it. The blades met, sending sparks flying as they split the moonlight. While the two blades were flying at him, Enkrid discreetly pushed the tip of his left foot into the ground. It was a subtle move meant to keep Jackson's attention on the sword. Then he kicked that lead foot forward. Poof! Dirt sprayed forward with a bit of weed mixed in, obscuring Jackson's vision. Instinctively, Jackson lowered his gaze, gripped the stiletto in reverse, and sidestepped. Enkrid's silver longsword stabbed through the air, nearly at the same moment as the dirt flew. But Jackson had anticipated and dodged it. Jackson's specialty was the correct sword technique. Whenever he fought head-on, he enjoyed calculating his opponent's moves and keeping them within his own intent. It was the same this time, although there was a new element added. That was why Enkrid saw Jackson as a beast hiding its claws. On the other hand, to Jackson, Enkrid felt like a smooth, unyielding flintstone. No visible gaps, that's how much he had grown, which is why—
"This should be fun,"
Jackson muttered. Enkrid, hearing this, replied,
"You don't say."
"Wow, where have you been getting beaten up like that?"
Andrew had arranged separate rooms for them, but the stairs leading up to the rooms were the same. In front of those stairs, Rem was standing, tossing and catching his axe as if playing with it. Noticing the subtle swelling on Jackson's left cheekbone, Rem smiled widely and spoke up.
"You didn't sneak attack and went head-on? That's not like you. What's up? Got dumped by a girl? Did you lose your mind or something?"
Rem was in such a good mood that he was just spouting off random nonsense. Normally, Jackson would have ignored him, and under the previous mood, he wouldn't have even pretended to listen. But now, things felt different. His usually tight expression had loosened up, and he responded without thinking.
"Dumped? Do you think I'm you?"
With just 6 words, Rem was left feeling utterly defeated. Judging by appearances, Jackson's face was strikingly handsome, enough to make one think he could easily be the poster boy of any salon.
"Real men are all about raw masculinity, you brat."
Rem replied, but thought to himself, looks like he's come back completely relaxed.
"I don't even have the energy to stop you guys today. If you're going to fight, take it outside. Don't break anything in here."
Enkrid approached Jackson from behind and spoke. Andrew, being stingy, hadn't placed many candles in the mansion. Lamps were even harder to come by. Judging by the food and the overall condition of the place, it didn't seem like a household of wealth. Even the wooden training swords used by the trainees made that clear. As a result, the mansion was quite dim at night. Enkrid seemed to emerge from the shadows in the darkness. Of course, Rem had already sensed his presence by then.
"You fought with the captain?"
Rem called out from the top of the stairs, glancing down. As Enkrid stepped into the light of a wall sconce, his condition became more visible. While Jackson's left cheekbone was swollen, Enkrid had a swollen eye and was limping. There was also a small puncture wound on his arm. Through the bandages wrapped around it, blood could be seen seeping through, the mark of a knife that had been stabbed in and pulled out. Oh dear. Even from Rem's perspective, Enkrid's body had grown beyond sturdy. Now it was rock solid. Skill? His skills were not to be underestimated anymore either. For someone to wound a body like that, it meant they had fought seriously, both Jackson and Enkrid.
"Did he attack you from behind?"
At the suddenly asked question, Jackson now genuinely considered Rem not worth responding to.
"Move before I remove that useless head from your shoulders."
"Try it, punk. Don't think I'll let you off just because you came back beaten up."
"Rem, stop it."
Enkrid chimed in. Rem clicked his tongue, standing up by pushing off the stairs with just his heels. The old wooden steps creaked loudly. Rem, axe in hand and not exactly small in stature, leapt lightly to the floor without making a sound. It was as if a cat had landed.
"Kidding. Just kidding. Still, we're in the same company, so I was thinking of paying them back for you. Gotta keep the loyalty, you know? So it was just a spar?"
By then, Jackson had already moved up the stairs. When it came to silent movement, he was several levels ahead. Rem, noticing this, glanced up. All he could see were Jackson's heels as he neared the top of the stairs. Turning back, Rem remarked,
"Looks like you're pretty banged up."
"It's nothing."
Enkrid felt pain around his left hip, but he didn't think it was serious. The limp was more for quick recovery than because he couldn't walk. Besides, some of the injuries on his body were self-inflicted. In other words, the wounds were within his expected limits.
"So, what was that all about?"
Was he really asking without knowing it was a spar? No, he knew. There was a deeper meaning to his question. He was asking why Enkrid had pushed himself into such an intense fight. especially knowing Jackson's condition, because Jackson had been acting differently than usual. Enkrid internally let out an ah. Despite his appearance, Rem was sharp and quick to grasp situations, always knowing what needed to be done.
I was being chased after killing some noble's son. I've been busy running.
Rem's words from before flashed through Enkrid's mind. He had killed a noble's son and fled because he could. If he had needed to kill him secretly and escape, he would have. But for him to kill so openly and make it clear it was his doing, there had to have been a reason. Images of how Rem had acted up until now flashed through Enkrid's mind, and suddenly Enkrid realized why Rem hadn't slipped away after killing that noble's son. He had drawn everyone's attention, especially the noble's, to himself. It was necessary.
You made it so everyone would see you as the main culprit, didn't you?
Enkrid muttered to himself. Rem blinked. What was this guy thinking about now? He suddenly spouted some strange out-of-now-here comment.
Get a grip, did your sickness relapse?
Rem said, tapping his own head with his index finger. Enkrid ignored him and continued his train of thought. Kreis's words suddenly came to mind as well. Kreis, when bored, would often observe the personalities or attitudes of the company members. One thing he had said back then came to mind.
The captain might be lazy when it comes to thinking, but Rem is a bit different.
Different?
Rem knows everything but chooses to act as if he doesn't. He only reveals what he knows when it's necessary.
If Rem had secretly killed the noble's son and slipped away, what would have happened to the commoners who had suffered under that noble? Rem had shown himself so they wouldn't take it out on the commoners. He made himself the target, saying,
"Come after me."
He probably left traces intentionally and fought them off repeatedly. He led them to focus solely on chasing him, losing track of everything else. Then, when he had wasted enough of their time, he vanished, probably fleeing all the way to the outskirts. This guy is really cunning. Rem had been staring at Enkrid for a while before speaking again.
You're talking nonsense, and what's wrong with your eyes? Huh? Your eyes seem a bit off.
Enkrid shook his head. It's nothing. As he did, he continued thinking. Looking back, it made sense. Before Enkrid joined the squad as a mediator, Rem had only caused moderate trouble. The real mischief and reckless acts started after Enkrid came.
Because he could.
He did it so people would know what kind of person he was. He made sure no one dared mess with him and that he could live however he wanted without interference. He solidified his image like that. A sly stray cat. Who's really the sly one here?
Look, I'm telling you, your eyes are weird right now. Let's hang around a bit longer.
Enkrid didn't bother playing along with Rem's banter. Rem, sharp as he was, could probably guess what Enkrid was thinking. Though suspicious, Rem decided to go along with Enkrid's mood.
This about that stray cat?
Yeah, something like that.
Jackson's room was right at the top of the stairs. He hadn't bothered to hide it, so Jackson probably heard everything they were saying.
That cat always brings nothing but trouble.
Rem grumbled in his usual manner, but still, there was no mention of leaving or walking away. Enkrid climbed the stairs. As he did, he recalled the fight from earlier. More specifically, the moment right after their so-called sparring match had ended.
Stab me.
That's what Enkrid had said to Jackson at the end of the sparring session, but Jackson hadn't thrust his sword.
It's enough now.
Jackson had replied. Jackson shook his head. Enkrid looked at him and spoke again.
Just once, it's fine.
The man standing before him was the one who had taught him the sense of evasion technique. Even if Jackson had asked to stab him in return, Enkrid would have been fine with it. Enkrid truly believed that. When Jackson had first drawn his sword behind Enkrid, he had felt the killing intent. Along with that, he had sensed hesitation, worry, concern, and anguish lingered at the tip of the blade. Enkrid had felt all of that in a single stroke of the sword. After responding to all those worries and concerns with their sparring match, Enkrid had thought to himself, whoever was behind this was quite the schemer, with all sorts of tricks.
There was a contract to stab you.
Jackson had said this in the middle of their exchange. Enkrid couldn't help but be curious about the hidden figure behind the veil. A warning, a contract, and scheming. All the assassins and attempts on his life that had happened up to this point were likely orchestrated by the same person. The wooden stairs groaned as Enkrid climbed them, heading to the room where he would stay. As he did, he continued his thoughts. In the end, he'd have to give a response to everything that had been thrown at him. and it would be exactly the kind of response that his hidden opponent so desperately feared.